Hello.
Hello.
How's it going, Amanda? It's been a bit since you've been on Reclaim TV.
It has been a bit. Happy to be back. Happy to sit in here and just provide live reacts to
Yeah.
what you had to talk about here
Yeah,
today.
you were gonna film your reaction video later, but decided in the interest of time,
Yeah,
your shocking reactions would be live. So,
exactly.
yeah.
Yes.
Um, so this is this today we're gonna be talking about Castopod. And I didn't even really bother to come up with like a normally the titles of our Reclaim TV streams aren't literally one word, but in this case it is. I guess a proper noun, whatever. Nouns are words. Um,
So I've heard.
yeah. So I was a music major. I don't know I don't know that fancy language stuff at all. So,
I'm not
uh,
going to say what major I was, or else it's going to be pressure on me to know the fancy words.
so anyway, we're talking about Castopod. It's a really interesting tool. I was gonna say really cool tool, but to be perfectly honest, I haven't used it very much yet. It looks really interesting. I hope it's a really cool tool. And we're gonna install it today and check it out on Reclaim Cloud and theoretically on shared hosting as well, because it does support shared hosting environments like cPanel. And I did some pre-testing of things, and it looks like it's going to work. But I will say I haven't spent enough time with it to know that definitely. So we're going to try that out as well.
Yeah, I'm really
Um,
interested in seeing if that works because I think that, even though, working with cPanel maybe isn't like it's not something we want to rely on too much, like is a lot more accessible to people sometimes than trying to build, work in a container, so to speak.
yeah, and I think there's podcast. I love podcasts and podcasting. I think it is a small encapsulation of like to me, podcasting is so tied to the web in philosophy, and I love that in terms of, I mean, technical philosophy, like of how it's built on RSS, and you can host a podcast feed in multiple places, but people can listen to them in multiple other places, right? They can use whatever app works with podcasts, not any app, but any app that someone creates to listen to podcast feeds is compatible with any podcast feed that's on the open web. And I really love that. And it's why I'm a little bit grouchy and angry when like Spotify or Apple Music roll out more like premium paid podcasting things that are locked behind paywalls. Although I do want podcasters to make money, so like whatever.
It's a
um,
tricky.
it's a whole thing. We don't have to go all the way into all of that. But I love that it's a diverse and kind of yeah, it's a diverse ecosystem, I guess is the word I'm looking for. And I think what's really cool about Castopod is it is, from a technical sense, kind of that too. So you can run it in shared hosting. You can run it on containerized cloud like Reclaim Cloud. You can run it in Docker. There's actually a bunch of other ways to run it too. One of the tools we've looked at, I think about a month ago, Jim and I looked at was called Why You Know Host, and it's kind of like a cPanel thing, but for not cPanel apps. So it's basically like you install this on your web host, and then you get access to. Actually, it's more like Installatron. You get access to all these community-made installers, and
Hmm.
it's kind of interesting. And they have an installer for Castopod. So there's a lot of different ways to install this tool, just like there are a lot of different ways to host or listen to podcasts. And I think that's really cool. I think audio is a format that is, at this point, doesn't require a lot of a server
Hmm.
or a person maintaining it. It's like pretty low bandwidth relatively. Not quite as
Yeah,
low bandwidth as a text web page, right?
sure.
But certainly lower bandwidth than a video. Um, and I think that's what allows it to even work in something like cPanel. So, yeah, I'm really interested in it too. I think we may end up, depending on how this works, we may end up using this for archival of the upcoming Radio Summer Camp, DS
Yeah.
106 Radio Summer Camp. And I personally have some old podcast feeds that are on like various services like Anchor that I would love to get off of there and put in my own cPanel account. So I may use it in both places for different contexts. So yeah, it's really interesting tool. The URL is castopod.org, and yeah, just we'll look at it a little bit more about what it does, what its features are in a bit. What I want to do is get a Reclaim Cloud environment set up here, because that does take a few minutes. So while we do that, we can take the opportunity to try it out. I did test it on Reclaim Cloud already, so if this goes completely sideways, I have one that we can look at. But I don't see why it would, other than my own mistake. So I'm planning for my own mistake here. But what we need to install Castopod is a Docker environment on Reclaim Cloud. So if I actually go to their Get Started thing here, they have, hey, you can download it, you can install it via these guides. We're going to follow the Docker guide for Reclaim Cloud and the manually guide for shared hosting. And they basically have a sample Docker Compose file that we just have to edit and put some passwords in and stuff. And it's relatively simple to get set up with. So I am going to go to the marketplace on Reclaim Cloud. I'm going to install a Docker Engine container here. The defaults are all fine. I'll give it a name like podcasts, and maybe we'll give the display name Castopod.
Do you ever get environment naming fatigue?
I do. Sometimes I will say when I'm not doing stuff on stream, I usually just use the default ugly names that are automatically generated. Unless it's, no, almost always I end up just doing that, because if you're going to map a custom domain to something, that doesn't matter anyway. That name hardly matters at that point. And for anything that's important that people are going to visit, we typically do map custom domains. It's just good to do that. It's nicer, and it allows you to do things like have a test environment and flip things between the two and stuff like that. So while we let that run, let's look at the website a little bit more here. So if I go back, Castopod describes itself as the free and open source solution to your podcasting 2.0 journey. Now, I am pretty into, as I mentioned, pretty into podcasts, and even one of the podcasts I listen to regularly has someone on it who develops the Overcast app for iOS, which I love that app personally. So my point is, I not only like podcasts, but I, as is probably obvious, I am interested in the technology of podcasts as well. I have not really heard of podcasting 2.0, so this made me curious, and I don't know what they meant, or I didn't know what they meant by that. But basically, Castopod not only lets you host audio files and make a feed for a podcast, but it also integrates with the Fediverse. So kind of like PeerTube, where you can have a channel and videos, but people can subscribe to that channel from any other Fediverse thing like Mastodon. And it basically will show up when you post a PeerTube video. If you follow our PeerTube from Mastodon, it just, every time we post a video, you get a little thing in your feed, just like as if it was tweeting,
Right.
Same thing with this. So not only can people subscribe via an RSS feed, which is probably what most people do because that's what podcast apps tend to support. You can also, maybe you're not really into podcasts and you don't have an app that you want to use or anything like that. You could just subscribe in Mastodon or some other tool that supports the Fediverse. You can even have conversations. Apparently, this is not something I have seen how this works, but I'm assuming that kind of works through replies and comments and stuff like that. So it's really kind of interesting. It has some built-in analytics things, and podcast analytics are a whole thing because it's kind of actually hard to track, like how, in the same way we do for web pages, how much visitation a audio file or listening it gets, because typically you download an audio file to listen to a podcast. That doesn't mean you listen to it though. Like if you're like me using a podcast app, the app I use downloads every single episode, or one at a time, but
Yeah.
that doesn't mean I listen to it.
And you don't know
um,
how many times someone's listening to it after they download it.
exactly. So um, I'm actually kind of curious about this. So it's cool that it has built-in analytics, but personally, I kind of love that a lot of that data is not available to advertisers in an easy way anyway.
It's true.
Um, so I don't know. Maybe I hope that this isn't creepy tracking, I guess is what I'm saying, or at least it. I hope it's off by default or something like that. So
Sure.
we'll find out. I really don't know at this point. So that's kind of what the tool is. It's basically a podcast hosting tool plus Fediverse features.
That's really cool.
So if I go back to Reclaim Cloud here, oh, this is my. Let me rename these so I don't mix them up. Um, Already done. Sure.
Naming
Um,
fatigue.
yeah. And so we got Castopod. Well, we'll call this Castopod 2. Um,
Point
there you
up.
go. Yeah. I guess I have to go with Electric Boogaloo, right?
Oh, yes, you do. Pilot will appreciate it very much.
Um, all right. So this is our new instance, and it's pretty fast to get this set up relatively on Reclaim Cloud. So if I go to their instructions again and click on Docker, they have a sample Docker Compose file, which we are just going to use, and we have some things we have to change in here. So it says basically we have to generate some passwords where they have the word change me, and we have to tell it what the base URL is. So Castopod knows what like domain name it's at. And we will have to set up SSL, and that's something that Reclaim Cloud makes pretty easy, but it's something that we'll have to do. So I'm actually gonna do that right away. And the way I recommend for an app like this, where we're using someone else's compose file, that doesn't do anything to do with like proxies and Nginx and SSL, is we're actually just going to add a Nginx load balancer right in Reclaim Cloud and kind of make our lives easier here. So I'm going to actually click on this. We'll click on Nginx. That's great. I'm going to turn on the platforms SSL, and this works if you don't have a custom domain mapped, which we don't right now. So I'm going to do that. If you did have a custom domain, you would use a Let's Encrypt add-on, which is how a lot of things in Reclaim worked. But we won't do that today, but it's a pretty easy thing to do. You can look up in our documentation how to issue an SSL cert. And then finally, we can actually turn off the public IP address of our Docker container. We won't need it today because we're not mapping a custom domain. So it's going to turn that off. And then I'll hit apply. So it's going to go through and add an Nginx container for us. While it's doing that, we're going to do some work in Docker. So actually, I opened the terminal, but I don't need to do that. What I need to do is copy this and open the file manager. Go to root. I'm going to make a new folder for us to work in here, just to make things easy to track. So I'll call it Castopod. Also, for my own purposes, I'm going to add it to the favorites over here and add it as a volume. Basically, a volume means if I was to do a redeploy on the container to like upgrade its operating system, it would keep this folder intact. It wouldn't erase that. So I'm going to make a file called dockercompose.yml. That's the default name for a Docker Compose file. So that's
See, I feel like I should know how to do all of this, but I fully do not. So this is really great to watch.
This is one of, well, we do a lot of stuff on Reclaim Cloud, but we very rarely set up a Docker app from scratch.
Yeah.
Normally we're like using one of my installers, and I don't have an installer for this. And I don't know, maybe someday we'll make one, but especially if folks want to see one for this tool. But it's actually not too bad. And the nice thing about watching this video is you'll kind of learn a little bit about what I consider best practices for this stuff. So
yeah, I like that.
So we pasted their defaults compose file. So that's great. We do have to go in here and we have to generate like a bunch of different passwords for the database and Redis and stuff like that. We're also going to have to set the base URL. I'm going to do that right now. So that's going to be the environment URL. So podcasts, whoops, .ca, whoop, oh my gosh. Let me just do this. .ca, .reclaim, .cloud. And you can use any password generator you want. I like to use the one built into 1Password. They also have a dedicated web page for it.
I did not know that.
Yeah, I didn't know that until today, actually.
Oh.
I normally just use the 1Password app, but I don't want to share the app on screen. So
No, that's really handy. But I don't like using the app for it because
it's a little bit annoying. So
it's
I made
clunky.
a bookmark in Firefox, and you can give keywords to bookmarks in Firefox. So I can just type in pwgen and hit enter, and it'll go there. So
I need to learn the Firefox magic ways.
this is one of those things that I found out in like 2008 when I first used Firefox personally, and they just haven't killed and no one talks about. But I'm pretty sure one of these days they're gonna remove that feature because I just never see it mentioned.
Well, I just am always mad jealous when I see you just like type a little thing in your browser and like something pops up that I just like scroll my bookmarks for. So it's cool.
I use it a lot, and the nice thing is if you use Firefox's sync, that goes to other computers too. So it's really easy to like set it up once and just it's available everywhere. I think except I don't think they work in the phone app, but that's fine. I would prefer to click on a bookmark probably there anyway. So
yeah.
All right, so that's a password. We really don't care about these, honestly. And for anyone that's watching this, don't worry, we're gonna change these if I end up using these. If I end up using an instance like this for something real for a project at Reclaim, we're gonna end up changing these. So we need to do MySQL password. We need an analytics salt. So I'm gonna hit this little regenerate button, and it'll make a new one for me. This is a salt is for encryption purposes. Basically, make sure that your encryption is different than somebody else's. We need a Redis password, it looks like. Great. And then these probably will be used elsewhere in the file. So I'm going to keep looking here. We need a root password. That's a new one. We haven't had that yet. So let me generate another one. And we want to, it asks here for the MySQL password again, so we need to make sure we're using the same one. And this is so that the app, Castopod, can talk to the database. Otherwise, it won't know the MySQL password. And then it looks like down here is where the Redis password gets used. And that's all of the passwords. The final thing we need to do to make our lives easier is we want to change this port. So right now, if I spun this up, Castopod we'd have to go specify port 8000. And we don't want to do that. We want to just use the regular web ports, especially because we have a proxy with SSL set up. So I'm going to change this. Instead of 8000, we're going to make it 80. So basically what this says is open port 80 to 8000 inside the container. That's why, so the left and right matters. We want to change it on the left side.
Gotcha.
All right, so I'm going to hit save, and then we're going to open up a terminal, and we're going to spin things up. So if I go to the Castopod folder, just make sure my file's in there. Yep, that looks like my file. And so I'm going to do docker compose up-d. And so up brings the stack up, runs the application. -d says do it in the background. Keep running in the background even if my terminal's not running. So I pretty much always use the -d flag, basically.
Is it done?
All right, so yeah, it is running. Now's the cross my fingers moment. Okay, so it is working. So we're at podcast.ca.reclaim.cloud. This is one thing where the official instructions kind of didn't. I was a little bit clueless from this point
Mm.
until I looked in their manual guide about how to set things up. But like I was like, great, now what do I do?
Right.
So if you go to cp-install, it will have you create a user account. So I'm gonna do that.
Not very intuitive.
Yeah, and I guess I don't want to mess things up right now, but I haven't thought of like maybe if I just went to the normal login page, which I also don't know what that is, um, maybe it would have prompted me for one there, but yeah,
Yeah, that would have
whatever.
been my instinct, but didn't look like there's like a easy way to get to something like that.
Yeah. Okay, so I created a password here. Let's log in. Perfect. So we have a admin dashboard. So I've barely looked at this. So like I said, I did set one up just before this just to make sure, the prequel to Castopod 2 Electric Boogaloo came out this morning, and I did mess around with that a little bit, but really haven't looked at this dashboard too much. So it is kind of cool. So you can, or I like how I guess focused this is. So you can go to the home dashboard and see things like your like storage and bandwidth usage, which is kind of neat. Um, but you can go to podcast here and add a new feed. So you can add a cover art right from here. You can give it a title and description, and this is the metadata that podcast apps would use for the title and description and things. I guess you can specify if it's episodic or serial, as in like, is this a story people should listen to front to back,
Mm.
or is this like a news show where a new episode comes out every
Do you
time? That's
know
kind of neat.
do you know if that would change the way that it like shows up on podcast apps or
I didn't know that this was a specification, and I
mm.
wonder if this is part of their podcast 2.0 thing.
Mm.
Whereas maybe if your podcast app speaks podcast 2.0, it could possibly sort based
That's
on that
what I would think.
information.
I think
But
that would be really cool.
that is speculation. I have no idea. And I will say I've never I don't know what apps are compliant. I think Castopod is a little bit early to whatever this specification
Yeah.
is. I'm not even 100% sure Podcast 2.0 is a specification. It may just be something that they're trying to make a thing, you know.
It's not even a
Um,
thing.
yeah, I really don't know enough to say where that is. I don't know if it's a standard or anything like that, but um, I don't know. We'd have to play with it. Um, the You can choose like you can host music and audiobooks in here, which is kind of cool. So it can like organize into, hey, this is like a static in that we made an album and here it is. So I like that this could be used as like maybe a more generic audio hosting platform. That's kind of cool. Um, and the audiobook thing as well. So you can have different files represent chapters. That's really cool. But we're just gonna stick with kind of like the default here for now. The classification. So again, this is all metadata. This is stuff that is familiar to me. Like when you submit a podcast feed to like the iTunes um, directory, you have to tell it what languages or what language it's in and what category. And I believe these are the sort of what like Apple has defined as what they expect in their directory, essentially.
Mm.
But let's say we wanted to let's do a garden podcast. I like that. But you can give it other categories as well. You can say if there's a parental advisory on any of this, and give it a name here. Taylor's Gardening. Oh, I guess this would just be my name. Remove the owner. Oh, that's cool. So you can fill all this out. You can also create a Fediverse identity right here for this podcast, which is kind of cool. Again, I'm not gonna do garden talk. I'm not gonna do a ton in this because I mostly just curious about what this looks like. Um,
So yeah, that premium, is that something to do with Castopod specifically, or is that something where like people can support the podcast or?
I think Castopod has a system by which you can um, mark folks as basically you can hide the feed from public um,
Gotcha.
use, and you can say, oh, these people have to log in, but then they'll get access to the feed.
Okay. Gotcha.
I again haven't used this feature, but I haven't used any of these features yet. But I do believe it supports that, which is also interesting. It's harder to do that in a way that podcast apps support in something like um, some of the simpler tools I've looked at in the past. At one point, I've messed around, not on stream, but I messed around with this tool called Podcast Generator, which is it's just this works in shared hosting, but this tool, which it's not, it doesn't see very frequent updates, and I'm not even
Mm.
sure if it works anymore. But this tool is basically just like, we'll make a feed that's formatted for you properly, and that's about all it does.
Yeah,
Um, doesn't really have any support for like logins and stuff like that. So
that's really
um,
nice then.
yeah. So this has value your analytics data with OP3, an open source trusted third party analytics service. Okay. So it looks like it can hook up to whatever this service is for analytics.
Hmm.
So, but it's off by default. Custom tags, ownership verification. Okay. Prevent it from being copied. Purpose is to tell other podcast platforms whether they're allowed to import this feed. Okay. Hidden from public catalogs. Yeah, so it's interesting. So let's make this feed here. I didn't. I guess I have to give it a cover. So let me find an image I can use here. Just use the Reclaim EdTech logo, I think. I'm not sure if that will be appropriate. It's not wide or tall enough. Whatever. Okay. How about we? Don't want to specify podcast cover image. I want to find like a template and just use it temporarily.
Hmm.
I guess I could just go into my image editor and make one to its specifications. Or use Canva here, but
Yeah.
let's just use Canva here. That's fine. Yeah, here we go. Welcome back,
Beautiful.
podcast every Monday. Okay, can I download this? Oh my gosh. Let me log into Canva. I don't use it very much. Okay, great.
I wish that when they give you the error about the image that they would kind of include the specifics. Yeah, it's not in the correct format. Oh, okay. All right.
This time is the handle field. Um, yeah. Yeah, well, and it says
Oh,
here
here it
it
is.
must be square, it must be 1400 pixels.
Okay.
I don't have that laying around on my computer, so I was like, all right, well, maybe it's lying and it doesn't really care. You know.
Sure.
Um, we'll have to see. I'm not sure what the handle field is. Oh, here it is. Okay. So it's talking about the Fediverse stuff. And I I'll maybe the dash it doesn't like. These errors aren't amazing, although I will say I'm barely taking the time to read them, so probably my fault. All right, cool. So that worked, and it looks like it makes it as like a draft feed, and then we can publish it later on, which I may do. Now, it's important to note too that the way podcast feeds typically work is you host your podcast somewhere, right? You host it on maybe a dedicated podcast hosting service. Maybe you use something like Castopod and you host it on Reclaim Cloud or something like that. Or maybe you use like a free service like Anchor, which is owned by Spotify.
Hmm.
Um, wherever you do that, you publish your feed, and then from there, if you want folks to be able to find it, like in Apple Podcasts or Pocket Casts on Android or Overcast, the app I really like. If you want folks to not have to know the URL of your RSS feed, you then have to submit it to the index, the podcast index services. And the big ones are Apple's directory, which I don't used to be it used to be under the brand of iTunes. I don't think it is anymore. I don't remember what it's called. And YouTube is another one. And frankly, I know there's like a whole thing on how you have to submit feeds to YouTube and how that works. I don't know anything about it, but my point is this is the step one of here of this is your hosting platform. So once you publish your feed, you then would probably want to submit it to podcast indexes is the word I'm looking for. All right, so it's scheduled for publication this minute. Okay. All right, I guess I just had to refresh. All right, so here's what the front end of the site looks like here. So because I guess there's only one podcast feed, it defaults right into this with my beautiful generic cover image. And you can, have little descriptions here. People can, I guess, like comment on it and stuff. That's cool. So this is what Castopod looks like.
I like it.
Yeah, I kind of like how simple this is. It is interesting that they went with like what if podcast websites look like Twitter, sort of.
Yeah.
But I can see why. I mean, there is something recognizable there. Hey, we are publishing a new episode next week. Okay,
So you
can put
can
little
write a post linked
as
to
the
specific,
podcast.
as the podcast, and you can even link to a specific episode. I wonder how that can affect like searching for the podcast. Or
I suspect that feature is mostly to do with the Fediverse stuff.
Gotcha.
So I would imagine, obviously, I don't have any episodes uploaded, right? But that's what your podcast app is going to care about.
Mm-hmm.
And I imagine this is what would show up in Mastodon, potentially.
Yeah.
In fact, I want to try that. So I'm going to go over to my Mastodon account. And we're just going to paste the URL we were looking at. I don't know if this is the correct URL. This is kind of the problem with Fediverse stuff is sometimes tools have weird expectations about what URL to use, and looks like in this case that is happening. Okay. And I would probably have to read a little bit more about how this is supposed to work. Follow. Okay, so sorry, it opened up a new window that you can't see. Here we go. So I guess I would do. I think this is what it's expecting.
So you put in your handle.
Yeah, I think what it's saying is like, hey, oh, here's probably what I need to actually search for. But it doesn't look like it's working. It's possible that there's some further configuration I have to do to make the Fediverse stuff work.
That's true.
As I've said, we have not really. Where's my Mastodon? There we go. Let me try this URL and see if that does anything. 422 private network address error. Okay, so I'm
Didn't
guessing
you?
that this is
Didn't
related to
you?
my Castopod instance not being configured correctly yet for
I think
Fediverse
you
stuff.
kept it as not being. There was like the setting about it being discoverable or not, or searchable.
Oh, yeah, maybe. Um, Eric asked, does it need a real DNS entry? Very possibly. It's
Mm-hmm.
very possible that for whatever reason, this doesn't work on a Reclaim Cloud URL. Maybe maybe there's ports that need to be open other than like 80 and 443 for web. Although I don't, that hasn't been an issue for like PeerTube and other tools we've used, but it's very possible. Um, okay, let me go.
Yeah, is it that setting potentially?
Maybe. I think this is like a, hey, please don't copy my entire podcast feed and host a copy of it elsewhere kind of thing.
Okay.
But
Okay.
I'll turn it off anyway. It really can't hurt. There's nothing here. And again, this is what this stream is I haven't used this tool yet, but it's interesting to me. So, um, yeah, all right, it looks like that wasn't the thing this time. Add a person. Yeah, what I probably would do is look into what else needs to happen. I'm sure they have like a requirements, Fediverse requirements type of thing. Um,
That or DNS.
yeah, it could be DNS, but I'm gonna call it there for right now in Reclaim Cloud because what I want to do is take a second to see if I can get this working in cPanel, and I do expect this to be a little bit more difficult to do in cPanel. It's certainly more steps, so we're gonna call that for the moment. I'm gonna close all of these other tabs. I'll even close Reclaim Cloud for now.
But at least we know it's pretty straightforward to get it running.
Yeah, to get it running is straightforward, and then from there you would want to follow the documentation to enable Fediverse stuff. If you need email functionality, you would want to set up SMTP with something like Mailgun or your own email account if you have one that you can use SMTP with. That would be the next steps. But the tool works and is pretty simple to get running at least. All right, so I've got bookmarked their manual install. You'll note here I also have bookmarked our guide on how to fix permissions because we're gonna have to do that. And so basically their manual install guide says, hey, you need PHP 8.1 or higher, you need MySQL or MariaDB, you need HTTPS, and NTP synced clock, which basically just means your clock has to be correct on the server. Shared hosting fits all of that. So theoretically, this should work.
Never heard of the clock thing.
Yeah, time is really important in like network request stuff, and it's something we usually take for granted. And also, computers real bad at keeping track of time. So usually use a network of computers in many cases to keep the time, and then your computer checks every once in a while to make sure it's up to date. But
it's because time's not real.
if you leave a computer that's like off of the internet to keep track of time, it actually falls like minutes out of it falls minutes out of sync faster than you'd think. Now, by faster, I don't mean like in a day. I mean a long time, right? But yeah, it's kind of interesting. All right. It's probably not that interesting, but I find it interesting. So anyway, telling time, not a solved problem even in 2024, I would say. All right, so we need those things. It does say we need some particular PHP extensions. I don't actually know if we have these or not, but I think we do. So we're going to find out. Yeah, so we're gonna have to. It has a whole other things like I guess you can generate video clips with Castopod, which is interesting. That is not gonna work on shared hosting because video transcoding won't work, and FFmpeg is not available. We don't have Redis for caching, but the tool doesn't require it. So anyway, we need to have a web server. Then it says create a database. So let's do that first. So to create a database for this manually, I'm just going to search MySQL up in the search thing. I'm logged into just my cPanel, by the way. And I'll use the wizard here. So this just kind of walks you through the steps of creating a database and like the user account for it. So let me call this podcasts, I guess. And I'm going to great. So I'm going to create another user. I'm going to name the user the same thing, honestly, just for simplicity.
Right.
And I'm going to generate a password here. cPanel actually has a nice little password generator, which is cool. So we'll use that. You have to confirm that you've copied it,
Right.
which is nice. I'm actually going to put it here in my notes so we have it because we're going to need it later. And the database user was JadenME_podcasts. So I'll write that down too. And I'm going to just give it all privileges. It's going to probably need to read and write and do a bunch of other things to the database. I'll give it all of the privileges for this particular database. And that's fine. So it says, hey, this was added. And that's it. So we have a database now. If I go back here, we're going to need HTTPS. We're going to need to download and unzip the Castopod package onto the web server. And it says we have to set the web server document root to the public subfolder. That's going to be important. So I'm going to download the package here. You can see I've already downloaded it before, but whatever. Did it again. And we are going to go back to cPanel and we're going to create a new domain for this. So I'll go to the domains tool, and I should say I'm going to make a subdomain for this. Right. Is what I'm going to do. I'll create a new one. I'm going to call this podcasts.jaden.me. And then it asks what the document root is. And this is where its instruction, it needs to be the public subfolder within the Castopod folder. So I'm guessing what this means. I shouldn't say guessing. I did look at this earlier. When we extract this on the server, there's some files at this level here. Oh, you can't see what I'm looking at. But when we extract the zip, there's some files, and inside there is a public folder, and that's the document root that we have to set. So what we have to do is we have to take this default and append /public on it.
Okay.
I'm not 100% sure if it's going to complain because that folder doesn't exist yet or not.
Right.
Or maybe it'll just make it for me. I did this in the wrong order when I was testing things, and you actually can't change a document root in cPanel after you create a domain. You have to delete it and create it again.
Really?
So, yeah, it's annoying. It's easy to delete it and create it again, but it's annoying. So if I go, I have too many subdomains, but if I go in here, podcast.jaden.me, and it looks like it set it. So I can click on this to see, yep, so the domain's working. It has a cert, which is good because we needed that already. And if I click on this, it'll jump right into the file manager, which is nice.
Beautiful.
So I'm actually going to go up one level so that I'm at podcast.jaden.me. And remember, it said extract this, but the public subfolder is a document root. So we need to upload the Castopod thing and unzip it right here. So I'm going to hit the upload button, select a file. I've already downloaded it, so now I can upload it. It is going to take some time to upload.
It's not too big though.
No, I'm kind of surprised it's taking this long, actually.
Yeah.
It's possible my internet is being slow right now while streaming and things.
True.
Although it's suddenly going much faster, so I'm not sure. Cool. Oh, and I should mention the whole thing about you can't change a document root in cPanel after you create a domain. It's important to note that deleting a domain doesn't delete the files that were there. So to delete it and recreate it is, again, annoying, but you can totally do that procedure to edit the document root.
But creating the domain creates the file.
It looks like creating the domain will create the folder, but deleting it, and it specifically warns you. It says, hey, if you delete it from here, we're not going to delete your document root.
Right.
Which is probably for this very reason. But I do wish they just let you edit it. That would
right. I mean,
seems obvious to me that they would.
There's a solution there.
Yeah. All right. So if I reload here, there's our zip file. We can extract it by right-clicking on it, and it's going to ask us where we want to go with it. So this folder is fine. So let's hit extract. Okay, so the only thing here is now it's created a folder called Castopod because of the way the zip file was made. So I'm actually have to go in here and select all and move this one folder up. So I'm going to move all of those, and I'm just going to delete this so that it goes into podcast.jane.me and hit move. And there we go. So at this point, you could delete this Castopod folder. This is technically now unnecessary because it's empty. I also could delete the zip file. I'm going to leave it there in case I mess something up and we need to do this over again. I'll leave that zip file there. And if I go back to the manual install thing, it says, hey, download and unzip the package. Great, we did that. Okay, now we have to add a cron task. This is for recurring things that happen in the background, processing. So we can do this in cPanel too. If you're like familiar with Linux, if you're watching this and you're familiar with like Linux and server stuff, you may know how to edit a cron. You do have to do it differently in cPanel because you don't have access to all the same tools on the server. So cPanel has a special cron tool called cron jobs. So I can go in here and I can add a new one. And I probably, the one I had tried out earlier is still in here. Let me delete that one. This is my testing earlier. So we can go in here and set the recurring day, month, how often it's going to happen. They want it to run every single minute, which is what those stars mean. So we will do that. So I'm just going to select this once per minute. So that's just sort of a preset that they have. And now I can paste in the command. I need to delete the stars, though. Again, in a cron expression, the stars are telling the server how often to run whatever thing.
And we've already done that.
Yeah. So it says we have to put a PHP, path to PHP. We're just going to use the system's PHP. That's fine. So I'm going to actually just delete that path to PHP.
Okay.
And this is going to say, let's run the PHP binary, basically. And it says path to Castopod Spark. So that's a file that we just extracted. So if I go back to the file manager, you can see that there's this Spark file right here. So the folder is home podcast.jaden.me, and then the file is Spark. So I need to change that. So I'm going to make this tilde, which means home, podcast.jaden.me/Spark. Tasks run. This can all just stay how it is. So we'll hit add, and there we go. It's added a new cron job, and this is what it looks like. Back to the instructions. And it says here, if you don't do this, you can't, certain features don't work. So.
I'm glad they spell that out at least.
Yeah, that's kind of nice. And, it's possible that there are some hosting setups where you wouldn't have access to cron, like, not any from us at Reclaim, but maybe a different company doesn't give you that access for whatever reason. So it's kind of nice that they mention that. All right, so run the install script by visiting the web page. So it's your domain name /cp install. So that's the same URL we went to earlier to set up our admin account.
Gotcha.
So in my case, it should be podcast.jaden.me /cp-install. and we get a 500 error. I forgot. We have to fix permissions.
Right.
So if you see this type of 500 error, it's probably a permissions thing with Apache. That's just like a universal truth of shared hosting. And I can tell you right now, because I see this all the time, yeah, it doesn't like these permissions. We've got like 666 and 777. Apache wants everything, I believe, we've got it written down here.
5.5.
755 and 644. You wrote this guide, right? I think. Yeah. So we've got the permissions expert in house. So
Oh God. Okay. Don't do that.
So what we have to do, we could go use like an FTP client, but it's way simpler in my opinion to actually use a terminal here, or it's certainly faster, I guess is
It's
maybe the
faster,
correct
for sure.
word. So I'm going to go to terminal. It's really important that I change directory to where this thing is installed. So I'm going to go cd podcast.jaden.me. I'm just going to do an ls for my own sanity. Yep, that looks correct. And I need to copy each of these commands and run them. So we'll do this one first. Take probably, 30 seconds or so. It's got a lot of files to loop through.
That's pretty quick.
Yeah, that was quicker than I would have expected, actually. Great. So the first was directories, second is files. That's what the type E
Yeah.
and F means. Great. So let me refresh. Okay, another problem. Your PHP version must be 8.1 or higher to run Code Igniter. Current version is 8.0. So I have to go into cPanel and change my PHP version for this domain. So let me go to the multi-PHP manager. Bet you didn't know this could have multiple pages.
No, I've never seen that.
Yeah, I really need to clean up my cPanel account. It's very bad. So it's set to inherent, which is PHP 8. So I need to change this to at least 8.1. We'll go with 8.1. And let's refresh. Hey, okay.
Beautiful.
So host name, that is correct. Base URL, basically you can use like a specific base URL if you want to post your podcast like on a CDN. This would be for like real big time podcasting. This is not for my dinky little podcast I want no one to listen to. But if you were making money off of this and you have a lot of listeners, this could be an important setting. You can set the admin URL and login URL, which is really kind of cool from like a security perspective. You could change this to be something very random, so that way you get less people even attempting to log in. It's kind of nice.
That's nice to do it like right from the get-go like that.
Yeah, I kind of like that this is a setting right in the installer. That's cool. All right, so database stuff. So we can leave the host name as localhost because the database is on the server. We need a name, username, and password, and then the prefix is not important. This is how it's going to name the tables. We can just leave this as is. This is kind of like when you look at a WordPress database and everything is typically WP _ options. Same thing with this, but Castopod, CP. All right, so I have in my notes over here. Whoops, there we go. I have in my notes over here the podcast database and password. So it was JadenMe _ podcasts. Again, normally you would not want anyone to ever see this as password, so I will be changing it later. Okay, so that seemed to work. Cache configuration. So it can use Redis to make like database lookups really fast. On Reclaim Cloud, we're doing that as part of the Docker stack. Here we can't on shared hosting. So we're just going to leave this at file. Hit next. And I think this at this step, it's setting up the database and doing a bunch of things.
Hmm.
And we're going to probably come right in at time here. So, all right. So now I get to make my admin account. Let me do that really quick. I'm just going to use a temporary password for now. Great. Now let's log in. Huzzah. All right, cool. So we are podcasting on shared hosting. So
Huzzah.
that was not, super fast to do, but honestly, pretty much just following their steps. I mean,
Yeah.
if you don't know, the tricky thing with this would be, I would say, the web root stuff. If I think most people don't know that you can change the web root of a subdomain on cPanel, or I guess technically you can't, but you can create a subdomain with a custom web root, so that is essential. And probably I would bet a lot of people haven't set up a database from scratch. A database manually.
Mm-hmm.
But it's not hard. You just have to know where to go in
Yes.
cPanel. And then you have to kind of do the dance I did, where you have to sort of write these down temporarily so that you can tell the application later. But from here, I think a lot of the same features should be available. I mean, I'd be curious to see if we have 0 time left, but I'm going to really
Fediverse.
quickly set up my garden podcast here. Podcast, garden cast, I think it was. And I want to see if the Fediverse stuff works on shared hosting. Maybe it's something to do with the DNS, as we were talking about before. It's probably gonna be very pokey on shared hosting compared to Reclaim Cloud.
True.
That's kind of how tools like this often go when they're designed for something like cloud.
Yeah, we need a whole stream on your hotkey wizardry.
I have a whiteboard of shame over here where I write down things I want to blog about, and there's like literally 8 things on there, and one of them is this tool, because I like it. I don't know if it's what I would recommend to everybody, but I'd love to talk about like why I use it. Basically, it's a text expansion tool, and there's lots of them out there, but the one I use is configurable in a text file. So the cool thing is I can use that same configuration with all the same shortcuts on my work computer and my personal computer.
That's very cool.
To me, that's required, because otherwise I would never, if I had different shortcuts on different computers, I just wouldn't use them. So
That absolutely, yeah.
all right, so let's try this on the Fediverse. Okay, so that works.
So is that DNS then?
I suspect it's an Nginx. Now that I'm thinking about this, I suspect that it's an Nginx configuration thing.
Mm-hmm.
We have that proxy in front of Castopod on Reclaim Cloud, and I remember specifically having to do some things with the Nginx proxy settings when I made my Mastodon installer on Reclaim Cloud that we did not do as part of our setup here. So I think that's the problem. Is
Okay.
So probably what I would like to make a Castopod installer for Reclaim Cloud at some point, and I can look at that, but I'm willing to bet that is part of the problem here. But I will say, for me, like for my own personal purposes, where I kind of view this as a I want to use this to archive some old things that I'm not really working on anymore. Living in cPanel is perfect for me. I don't care if it's like, it doesn't need to be scalable or anything like that. And I do think that it's an Nginx configuration issue. Now the problem is where that leaves us from the stream is I don't we would have to look at it further, and I don't know off the top of my head. But maybe at some point I'll do a follow up or even a blog post about how to do it, or possibly I'll make an installer for it. Given how simple the Docker install was, I will tell you right off the bat that this is I could easily take the installer I have for Ghost and just change a couple lines of code, and this would be an installer too. So
Beautiful.
that might be something I end up doing.
Easy
So,
win.
yeah. So success with Castopod. Definitely more investigation necessary, I think, for us to kind of dig into the features. This was very much a let's get it up and running kind of stream. I could totally see in the future us revisiting Castopod when we're more familiar with it at
Yeah.
Reclaim to say these are the features we like and all that kind of stuff. Because it does look like a cool tool, and I love that it works on both cPanel and Reclaim Cloud. So
For me, that's kind of the seller. So I guess people can stay in, tune back in for what we do with like the summer radio stuff, because that's probably how we'll apply this.
yeah, I like I said, I would love to use this for archives of the summer radio for
Right.
recordings and things.
Yeah.
And I think that would be cool because people could subscribe to the feed and listen to it in a podcast player. So
That's really nice.
yeah. So with that though, I think we're gonna sign off for the day on Reclaim TV. And thanks for joining me, Amanda. And
Thanks for having me.
yeah, and we'll see everybody next time.
Catch you later.